Hello. First of all, just a wee note to whoever is editing this. I'll try and do it in quite a structured way, and I'll send a wee email through about the different parts I'm going to cover, just so hopefully make it easier if you're wanting to snip it up for different pieces at different times. Okay. Hello, I'm Simon Maltman. I'm a local crime fiction author, and I'm from Bangor. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience of writing, a little bit about my own books, and in general a bit about technique that I found in writing, some information for up and coming writers or people just who are interested in books in general, and in particular people who are into crime fiction. So I've been writing for about 8 years. Before that, I suppose I dabbled in little bits and pieces, the same as a lot of people. I tried doing poetry and things when I was younger. I used to do a lot of songwriting. I was in and out of bands since my teens. And I had a go at a few screenplays and things like that, but nothing ever that I was particularly trying to finish or get to fruition. And it was about 8 years ago, I'd become a real avid reader, particularly crime fiction, and I thought I'm just going to have a go at this because I'd never really actually sat down to write fiction or really any kind of prose before that. And the most natural thing to me was to start trying to do short stories. So about 8 years ago, I started trying to do my first couple of short stories, and probably the same as most people, you very much are looking to emulate, your heroes. So for me, it was like Sir Raymond Chandler, Richard Stark, who wrote through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the 2000s. He wrote about a thief called Parker, and they were very sort of gritty, hard-boiled stories, and that's a lot of the stuff that I would be into, classic hard-boiled literature and a lot of modern crime. So that's what I tried to write first. For me, it was definitely the best way to start because it's the only way. Well, the only way in general I think is to learn if you can do any form of prose is to just have a go at it. And in the early days, I think anybody will tell you you've no idea if it's going to be any good, if anybody's going to want to read it, if you're doing it completely wrong, and undoubtedly you will be doing lots of things wrong at the start because you can read books and you can do all the research, but until you actually start doing it, you don't know if you know any idea what you're doing, and you certainly doesn't feel like you know what you're doing. Everybody has a little bit of imposter syndrome, and most of us still have imposter syndrome and probably will always have imposter syndrome, and it's always refreshing to hear when you go to events with some of the really big crime writers, and they all say the same thing. They still don't know really what they're doing. That's probably not helpful to newer writers, and they don't really always know how to kind of grasp the essence of what they do. But I'll try and tell you a little bit about what I think I do or what works for me. It might not be what works for you, but hopefully it'll give you an idea about how to find your own path, because that's all you can really do. A lot of writers, there's a lot of very good writing books out there, and a lot of writers will often tell you should do this, this, and this, but with the caveat that's not what I do. So I'll probably try and tell you what I do, and you can have a go at it yourself, or really whatever works for you. So I found, certainly doing the short stories, I really enjoyed it, and I found it was something that I really could throw myself into. I just loved right away the idea of making up stories, writing dialogue, trying to get inside your characters' minds. So I then started to send out to a couple of sort of small publications and online magazines, and I started getting the first few published, and people seemed to like them, which is brilliant because you really have no idea. I mean, you can send it to people that friends and family. They could either just tell you, that's brilliant, whether they think it or not, or they might tell you, oh, that's terrible. And either way, it's not really the most helpful. Really, it is helpful to a certain degree, and obviously, in general, showing it to other readers is always good along the way. But particularly in the early days, to have a little bit of feedback from a completely outside source and someone who would read a lot anyways, like an editor for whatever kind of magazine or online website you're looking to submit to, then at least that shows you that you can be on the right track to some degree. So that's what happened for me. I now am very much primarily a novel writer. I occasionally write short stories, I still enjoy it, but I just absolutely love the novel form. I find it really therapeutic, but I just really enjoy it. I love all the different aspects, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about how I approach it. But I fell in love with it, but it wasn't certainly the path I was looking to choose at the time. The idea of writing a novel to me was incredibly daunting, and I don't know if it would be for me at all. the way it turned out for me starting it was that an agent got in touch who read one of my short stories in a magazine and liked it and was interested in representing me if I was to write a novel. And so that was the thing that gave me a bit of a boot to have a go at it. And then I threw around some ideas and started working on a novel. I didn't actually end up joining with that agency in the future, but it was certainly the spark that set me off. And then I wrote my first book, and I got that published with a small publisher. And then since then I went on to write a sequel to that book, and then I did 2 standalones. And then last year, 2020, just as it happened, I had another 2 novels out, and both were in different lockdowns, so that was interesting. I had a book out called The Mark, with the publisher Close to the Bone, and then just before Christmas there, I had a new book released called Witness. And at the minute for me, I've just finished another novel, and I'm at the stage now where I'm editing it and sort of looking around to see who I might be able to sell it to and who might be able to publish it. And alongside that, I'm then working on another book. And when you speak to most writers, you'll probably find that there's such a big period of time between when the book's out there and you're promoting it to what you're actually working on. You could be 2 or 3 books past that, and it's a strange sensation, I must say. You know, by the time you come to launch, it's always exciting and it's great to have it out there, and particularly when if you get a bit of validation that you get the first couple of reviews come in, whether it's on Amazon and Goodreads or somebody blogging about your book. I mean, it's always really exciting, especially if people seem to sort of get what you were trying to do, and that they engage with it in whatever way. So that's where I'm at now, and as I said, the long form just really suits me. I absolutely love it. And actually just there, I took a bit of a break from writing just around Christmas a few weeks before, because I just finished a draft of the most recent novel I've been working on, and I didn't really know what to do next. I had 2 ideas, one for a sequel and one for a standalone, and I couldn't decide what to do. Because whenever you commit to starting a book, I'm very much someone who will be working on it every day, and I don't really want to start something unless I know that's what my time is best spent on, particularly if you're looking for a sequel. You want to see if this is going to be the next book that you're likely to sell. There's not a lot of point in necessarily having a sequel ready, if then you might end up writing on another book, and that might be not coming out for another year or 2. So by the time you would say a sequel, it could be years down the line, and particularly when I'd be more of an indie author, you want to make sure you're spending the best time on the right project at that time, because as I'll go on to describe, the publishing industry is an interesting animal to get acquainted with. But yes, I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So why do I write start that bit again. So why do I write crime? I definitely would classify myself unashamedly as a crime fiction author. I suppose the short answer would be I never really considered writing anything else. They say write what you know. I'm not a criminal, but I am a big fan of crime fiction in books, TV and movies too. And I think whenever you start writing, you're likely to do that. You're going to write the kind of stories that you enjoy yourself. Because at the end of the day, I think writing is primarily at the start, it's telling yourself a story. And if it's not a story that you can engage with or find interesting, then you're sure it's not going to engage anybody else. So I suppose that I did start writing crime fiction, and the brilliant thing about crime fiction is that it's not one thing. You know, 100 years ago, crime fiction was often cozy mysteries and trying to unwrap things like locker room mysteries, trying to work out who the killer is, put all the threads together, and that is still quite a popular form now. Then there's a very long period where sort of following an employed detective in a police department, that would have been a very popular crime fiction, and it still is to a certain degree, though it's a little bit on the wane at the minute. They'd often be referred to as police procedurals. And then there was a big buzz with Private Eyes. You had like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, and then you even have people like Rebus with Ian Rankin's great creation, sort of melding the two these days, from being a police procedural employed detective to being more of a kind of consultant private eye. And now we find ourselves in the, I think, fantastic position that there is just a massive wide range of crime fiction. There's still all those types, but there's like domestic thrillers where it's more involving things happening to ordinary people, and there's maybe very little to do with actual the police themselves. You can have crime where it's really involving sort of criminals who are like, career criminals, if you like, who put on heists and things, or people who murder a lot. Serial killers are obviously a popular format, and then you have again the mixing of the two with the release of Girl on a Train. Psychological thrillers got a real rebirth in the past. I suppose the likes of Patricia Highsmith, you could have called it her books psychological thrillers, and it's really come back around again. And there's just a complete wide range. And me myself, I quite like dipping in and out of different ones. My first couple were more along the private detective, set in Northern Ireland, my first couple of books. And then the next one, I always try and do something a bit different with each book. Sometimes it's to do with the main sort of characters or the tone of the story. Although also I quite like mixing up the narrative. So my first couple of books were done from the first person perspective, and I think that is a really good format, and it works brilliantly for certain stories. But it's nice even just to test yourself and see what other stories you can write if you're using the third person or mixing up perspectives. My third book, I sort of split it into 3 different sections from different perspectives, and the first one was from the killer's perspective, and then it was from the same period of time from a detective's perspective, and then the last part was in the third person, sort of tying it all together. And I just found that quite an interesting experiment. I've written the book after I wrote from a female perspective, and then these last 2 books I've been writing in the third person, and I've really been enjoying that because it wasn't something I used to do as much, and I think it does give a slight different tone and flavour to the book. And you can bring in other aspects. For instance, you can bring in aspects where your main character doesn't necessarily see things happening, which you can't do in the first person because they need to be there. And there's just all these things that you have to sort of think about what you're going to show and how you're going to fit your story together. At the end of the day, crime fiction, it definitely is incredibly popular at the minute. It's one of the most popular types of novels, and there's always an age-old debate about, is crime fiction, just genre fiction, and does it not have as much worth as some sort of literary fiction? And I think that's a load of nonsense. At the end of the day, if you enjoy a book, that's brilliant, and every book can be different and it can offer you something. If you're looking to read a really deep philosophical book, it's going to give you something from that, but it doesn't have to necessarily be particularly thrilling or pacey. And if you are writing a thriller book, it doesn't have to be necessarily particularly philosophical, but it can be both. And I think we just need to get away from this idea of saying one book's better than another in these sort of ways. I've enjoyed trying to do different books in different ways. My last book, Witness, it came out, it's got quite a lot of quite heavy themes. It's a post-troubles book, and there's a lot to do with question around religion and sort of how you do the right thing and people's morality. And it's been really lovely. I had a blog tour recently, and a lot of people had reviewed it and have been sharing their thoughts about it, and it was nice to get the sort of positive feedback, but also it was just really interesting about how people viewed the main character in particular. I think you can be quite defensive of your characters, and the character in that is purposely very flawed. Makes a lot of dubious moral judgments. For that book, I really wanted it to follow the idea of sort of, can somebody think they're doing the right thing all the way along? And in this book, it's actually a character who's a pastor. But how bad can you end up getting by still thinking you're doing the right thing, and even thinking you're doing something for God and for religion? So that one, I suppose, they will have a lot of witty scenes, but hopefully also, I mean, it is a thriller book. There's lots of action in it, and it's quite pacey. And in a different way, the book that I've just finished, it's set in a different time period. It's set in the late 1980s, and I moved the action to New York around a serial killer being tracked down. So it's a very different tone. But again, I wouldn't say that the book I did before is better because it's got weightier themes. I think really the great thing about crime fiction is you can put anything in it you want, and it's so broad and it covers so many areas, and you can argue that so many works of literary fiction are crime fiction anyway. If Macbeth isn't crime fiction, then I don't know what is. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the local crime fiction scene in Northern Ireland. We've got a great writing scene in general. There's lots of speculative fiction, there's a good bit of children's fiction coming up, literary fiction, a lot of poetry. But I'm probably biased, but the crime fiction scene seems to be one of the strongest. And I really enjoyed being a part of it, and I found it really, really supportive. And we've got so many amazing writers, and we've had this boom. It's often would be called Ulster Noir. A lot of it would centre around the Brilliant No Alibis bookshop in Belfast. David Torrance has always been very, very supportive of all the local crime writers. There have been an awful lot of events on there. A lot of people do their launches, and lots of international authors have come over to speak. And then, of course, we have the Big Northern Festival has been on over the last couple of years. And it was an awesome festival. So many good writers, really interesting panels and events. And what I was saying there about the different types of crime fiction, the interesting thing is that in Northern Ireland, we sort of cover all the different genres. There's people working in so many different areas. I mean, you've got the likes of Adrian McKinty, his very successful Sean Duffy series set in the 80s, a police procedural but a very funny one. And then he's also recently written The Chain, you've probably heard about, which was just a massive blockbuster, and again it's going down more the sort of high concept thriller route. Steve Kavanagh would be similar again. He writes really great high concept thrillers set in New York. And then you've got loads of local writers really capturing that Northern Irish spirit and the grittiness at times. You know, you've got the likes of Kelly Crichton and Sharon Dempsey and Jared Brennan. Loads of good books coming out. James Murphy. Well, I would say the Ulster Noir scene is really starting in the early 90s when we had the likes of Colin Bateman writing his really funny, really well written thrillers and mysteries, like Owen McNamee as well. And then we gradually had this climb, and then like Stuart Neville and Brian McGillivray came along, who are excellent writers, and they've been New York Times bestsellers. And from that, it's just grown and grown and grown. Through the Troubles, we didn't have a lot of crime fiction. It's been talked about many times, but I would agree with the consensus that it's probably because during the Troubles we had so much violence already closer to home that people wouldn't look for escapism there, because crime fiction at its heart is escapism. Probably why we're very obsessed these days with true crime documentaries and on Netflix, because you can engage with this and you can sort of feel safe in your home while you're watching these terrible things without feeling the danger. But I think that's why we didn't have it so much, because there was real danger during the 70s and 80s. And then after the Good Friday Agreement, post Good Friday, we've had all sorts of crime fiction really coming to the fore. I think that's got a large part to do with it. I mean, there were still some good books in the past. As I said, there was the Troubles trash, which was more people writing from American England, setting books here, and often getting lots of the sort of story of Northern Ireland muddled up and annoyed people greatly. And I suppose it was just like an easy place to set something exciting and thrilling in a way. But we did have some great writers like Sir Maurice Leach and the great book Silver City coming through them. But really, what we have had going now for the last 5 or 10 years is something else. I mean, it's a lovely scene, and everybody's so supportive, and it's just growing and growing, and it's just great to see the variety of really good crime fiction out there. So what is my technique? It's hard to describe your own technique. As I've said, writers often will say this is what you should do, but it's not what I do. One of my favourite writing books that I've read is Stephen King's On Writing. It's a brilliant one, and for any budding writers, I would say definitely read it. He approaches it in a really interesting way. A lot of it is to do with his personal life, and he's nearly linking that to how he's come up with different ideas at different times, how he approaches writing when he does it. Everybody's got a different way of doing it. He has set times he does throughout the day, and set breaks. Roald Dahl famously went off to his little shed in the garden, and he worked for different periods and stopped and had a gin and tonic on his lunch. I did another writing period and whatnot, and it works for them. For me, I'm fairly regimented in the sense I do like to write every day. I occasionally might get something done during the day, but I work and have small children as well, so the opportunities aren't always bountiful. But in the evening I always try and get an hour done, and I think really if you even just have an hour, you can really make it count. I find that I don't tend to faff about too much, especially if I know I'm only setting myself a little bit of time. because I've got to do other things, and you can be really productive in that time. But it's whatever again works for you. It can be in different places. Right now, I'm filming this out in my garage. I'm lucky to have a kind of office area upstairs, and it's somewhere I can get away from everything and put on music, and just work away. Again, some people need to have complete silence, need to be in the same place. I mean, I can write in other places, in coffee shops and in the house. I've written on holiday and things before too. And it's whatever works for you. Some people only like to write in coffee shops, which is a bit of a problem during lockdown. I'm not sure what those people are doing. Maybe they'll set up their own little coffee shop in their living room, I'm not sure. But it's whatever works for you, and if you need complete headspace, or if you need music, or even the other side, if you need to have chatter. I mean, a lot of people write on trains and buses. But I would say try and get into some sort of habit yourself, because it's very easy to let weeks and months go by, and a lot of people do that. Even authors who have had a book or two published, some of them have years between books, and it's not really because they want to. I think they want to get into it, but it can be hard to discipline yourself. I certainly find if I can write a little bit every day, I can always have a book, the sort of genesis of it, and it written and edited and usually out within that year. So the last sort of 5 or 6 years I have been releasing a book every year, and usually sort of a few short stories and things too. So it is achievable, and at the end of the day, if anybody can discipline themselves and can get through to actually get it completed, you know, you can too, because I found it so daunting at the start, but now I just absolutely love it. And just a little bit about how you approach getting your idea and getting it down on paper. For me, at the start there usually is some sort of genesis of an idea, some little, just something will come along and hit you, and sometimes it can be really, really exciting. I love that part of the whole process. I remember with my third book, the whole idea sort of hit me in the shower, and I had nearly the most of the scope of what it would be. Obviously not the detail, it would be impossible, but really a good thread for that, you know, you can follow it through. And I think you just get a bit of a feeling that, you know, you've got something that could be a book, because not every idea is going to be a book, and you have to be disciplined enough and honest with yourself to sort of work out that obviously not every idea you have is going to be fantastic. But I would definitely get a little germ of an idea and have my all important, always have my notebook. I say, you gotta have a notebook. You might not necessarily be a planner. Some people like to call themselves pantsers, by the seat of the pants. I used to be a bit more like that at the start, where you don't know where you're going, and that is an exciting way to write, because you really don't know where you're going. But the downside is you're not always as productive with your time, because you don't know what's going to happen next. You can write yourself very easily into dark alleyways, and you can't work out how to get out of them. Especially if you're writing mysteries, you can not sort of have any idea. When I've been in a position where you have no idea who's done the crime, what the heck's going on, you can get all sorts of problems. For me now, I like to be somewhere in between, where I like to have quite a lot of notes, but even not so much as that, I like to just even plan out roughly where I'm going over the next couple of days. I'll know where I'm going at the end roughly, but don't really know what's going to happen. I know the kind of general arc, and I'll spend a lot of weeks or a month noting down about the characters and about just my ideas and the setting and what I want to happen, some of the characteristics of people, some of the specific things I think are going to happen. And then as I start to write, I'll be making notes, and I'll say it's really important to make notes on what you've already written as well, not just necessarily where you're going to, because it's it's very easy. It's like, what on earth is that person's boyfriend called? Or I forget main characters' names until I go and check it out, particularly surnames. What was the name of that detective? What rank was he? Did he have black hair? You know, famously you have people with, you know, blind in one eye, and halfway through the book they end up being blind in the other eye, or they're missing an arm, and by the end of the book they're missing the other arm accidentally, or maybe it turned into a leg. Even Raymond Chandler could get it wrong. The Big Sleep's probably one of the greatest crime fiction novels of all time, and he forgot to tie up one of the murders. I think it was the murder of the chauffeur, and it just never got never got answered. And he admitted he just forgot about it. So I would say notebook, very, very important. And again, just try and keep yourself on track. The only way to be a writer is to write And if you're not in the mood to write, then you need to read, because the best piece of advice I could say is read, read, read. You won't be much of a writer if you don't read, because we're all just learning all the time, learning from the books you read and the actual words you're reading, and sort of trying to find how people find their own voice in their stories, and how they manage to engage you, and how they manage to pull you in, and what they are literally doing. You know, how much time are your favourite writers spending on setting the scene or on people's clothes? Is it too much, or is it pacey? And would you want to do something in between? It's all these sort of things you start to think about. And again, I mean, I like to think that I've developed as a writer. I never go back and read my old books. I might be horrified if I do, but you would like to think that you're getting better at it. I certainly think I'm getting more economical with my time. I kind of think I know more what I'm doing, but it's it's hard to say. If you actually, like I said, most people do have imposter syndrome throughout their life, and I think that's a healthy thing to have. If you're just to write down a couple of sentences or a chapter and think, oh my goodness, that's amazing, then you're probably doing something really wrong. Because most of the, certainly when you go to do, I mean, I would do one full draft and make it fairly, okay. Or I just write in Word and make it fairly okay, not too many spelling mistakes and things. But even so, when you go through it, you're like, oh goodness me, what was I thinking? What was I doing there? Oh, this is a terrible description. So I do find my second draft takes a very long time. That's one thing that I've definitely increased in time, actually. It can take me 2 or 3 months just to get a second draft done, but it should be hopefully a pretty good second draft by the end of that. And then obviously it'll go through many more edits in the future whenever you place it with a publisher. So just a few notes on how to get yourself published. Again, I would say in the early days it's great to try and get your stories in whatever publications you can, particularly ones that you know and that you read, and target to them to places that you think are going to publish it. I mean, there's no point in applying to a pretty gritty crime fiction publisher and send them something very flowery and or maybe sort of a fantasy story or something they're not going to publish. Just do your homework. And it's exactly the same whenever you're wanting to go up the rung of the ladder a bit and you're trying to approach publishers for a novel or a short story collection or a novella, or if you're looking to try and get an agent. Obviously, if you do get an agent, they will do a lot of the work then actually trying to find the publisher, but they'll take a commission for that, but they might give a bigger chance at getting with the bigger publishers, and some bigger publishers will only accept unsolicited manuscripts if they come through an agent. But these days, because there's so many ebooks being sold, so many publishers who more specialise in ebooks and can actually sell more than the really big publishers sometimes. With them, you don't necessarily need an agent, but again, they've got different editors who work for them and who will handle different stories. So you really have to put the work in and make sure that you're tailoring your letter to the right person and following all of their guidelines, because unfortunately every publisher, every agent has different guidelines. One person might say, we want a short sort of pitch letter and we want a couple of lines of text and say a half-page synopsis. That's fine. But then the next person will say, we actually want 50 pages pasted into the email, and then the next publisher might say, we want 30 pages, but we want it as a separate document, and we also want the synopsis attached in that, and we want to have a bio within the email and links to your social media. So unfortunately, it's not one cap fits all. You've really got to really work at what you're doing and make sure you're sending the right things to the right person and trying to engage that person, particularly if you can do your background and if you can approach people where you have read stories or books or authors, so that people aren't going to be particularly fond of the letter if you're sending it out and it's very much obvious that it's a blanket email, maybe even addressed to the wrong person accidentally, or dear sir, where the editor is a woman or something like that. There's no point in making those easy mistakes, really. But I would say do your homework, try and get yourself with a publisher that's going to be reputable, but also be realistic. Particularly in the early days, it's very unlikely you're going to get a really big publisher. I've worked with 3 or 4 different publishers, and they've all had their strengths and some weaknesses. But the bottom line would be, I would say, never pay to have your work published unless that's explicit at the start and that's what you want to do. Nothing wrong with self-publishing and maybe specifically paying someone to do the editing and maybe the graphics, or a publisher like Unbound, where you're sort of sharing some of the responsibilities with them. And also, if you're um, well, if you're sharing the responsibilities, but you're maybe also taking on a certain amount of money that needs to be raised at the start, that's also completely fine. But I'll just say, watch out for those vanity presses that we have about, unfortunately. There are these presses who will pretend, sort of go under the guise of being a sort of more big publisher, and a sort of traditional publisher in that sense, and then a few emails down the road they'll then say, could you then please send me the £2,000 so we can publish your book. I've had that before in the early days. I was like, oh dear me. And then there's plenty of websites where you can look up, there's one called Editors Predators, I think it's called, and you can look that up, and people will give their feedback on some of these ones, so you can look out for the ones who are actually just trying to snare you and make a quick buck, unfortunately. But so many good ebook publishers about, and again, you won't necessarily, I mean, hopefully if they're good, they won't promise you the earth, because if they know they can't deliver that, they won't. But hopefully they'll be up front and tell you what they can offer, and usually you would expect to get a number of rounds of edits with an editor who will work with you on your manuscript. They should pay to have the cover designed, and a lot of publishers, smaller ones in particular, will mostly do print on demand through the likes of Amazon, so they should be setting all that up, and they should be doing a certain amount of marketing. I mean, as an author these days, you will have to do an awful lot of marketing yourself. You need to have a social media presence. You need to try and engage people, and through the likes of a blog or whatnot. And I mean, that is very important, and there's no getting away from it. But hopefully, if you get signed with a decent publisher, they'll do a certain amount of publicity and marketing too. But definitely the onus will be on you as well to try and get reviews, try and put up interesting content, maybe make videos, use some of your other interests to engage readers, speaking at events, speaking to book clubs, anything like that. It's something that I really enjoy, and it's something I've really missed during these different lockdowns last year and this year as well. I enjoy speaking on panels at festivals and meeting readers. It's still an absolute thrill meeting people who've read your book and they enjoyed it and they've related to the characters. I mean, to a certain degree, that's what it's all about. So I would say, again, get to know some local writers. We've got a lovely group around Bangor who used to meet up once a month. Hopefully we will again after lockdown. Get to know people around you, because my experience has been writers are really nice people, and I've found the local scene really supportive. Everybody tries to encourage each other. Everybody's really nice. So just really try and get in touch with other people. So what are my other interests that link in with my books? Well, I've got a few things that I've quite enjoyed sort of linking in with the books, and sometimes linked in with them at festivals and library events. I'm a musician as well, and I used to do a lot of gigs before lockdown. Hopefully they'll come again, and sometimes I've been fortunate that I've been able to put that together along with my love of crime fiction. So there's been different events. I can think of a library event last year, and at the East Side Arts Festival the year before, myself and Jared Brennan did a few events where we do some readings and do some talking about our books, but also play a few tunes and crime related tunes. You should check out the Fun Loving Crime Writers if you haven't come across them yet. They're a brilliant band featuring some of the world's top crime writers. Our own Stuart Neville on lead guitar, he's an awesome guitarist. They're fronted by Val McDermott, Mark Billingham. They're a really great band, and they played in Belfast there, and they got a few of those local crime writers up. We got to do some backing vocals on Sympathy for the Devil by the Stones, doing the woo-woos in the background, so that was good fun. And music's definitely a part that I really enjoy linking in, and in my books, music's always a big part. I very much think that whoever the particular character, music-wise, is into can often tell you quite a lot about their personality, and I try and use that. Sometimes I try to give the bad guys a really bad taste in music. I'm not sure if I should do that. It might offend some people who like that music. Another big interest, I've talked a little bit about my love of the local scene and about crime fiction in general. I'm also a tour guide for a tour I came up with alongside Belfast Hidden Tours, and it's called Belfast Noir. And on that we would talk about the local crime scene and this massive increase in Ulster Noir and Emerald Noir as a whole, and how Northern Ireland has been a setting now to so much crime fiction. The likes of Colin Bateman's Divorcing Jack, and there was the classic film noir from Carol Reed called All Man Out, and then recently we've had the massive hit of Line of Duty, um, and the likes of The Fall as well, and it's all been set around Belfast, so I would go around and do tours about that, and then we'd usually finish up in Lullabies, and it's a good opportunity to tell people a bit more about the local writers, and then they can have a look at the books, and it's just again something I really enjoy, and hopefully it's another thing we can get back to again after lockdown. So lastly, just to say a big thank you to NI Libraries for having me on, and just please do support your local libraries. Particularly, it's obviously been very difficult recently, but libraries are still able to get you books, and hopefully when lockdown eases again, we'll be able to get back inside them. I used to love writing in the library every week, and going in and getting books, and I'm interested in my books, and libraries have several of my books in there. Libraries are very supportive of local writers, from getting in local books and putting on events like Book Week NI, getting you in touch with new readers, and just supporting your work in general. I mean, it's brilliant. And I would just say, in general, I think during lockdown, you can't do much better than curling up with a good book. I think the stuff that's going out in the real world, in all different aspects, has been much scarier than what most of us could ever write. So whenever you can, just get yourself a cup of coffee and curl up with a big hardback, and just enjoy it really. I think it's one of the real delights in life. And I mean, as a father, I've got two young children, and it's been so lovely just seeing them get really into books. Particularly my 8-year-old is just devouring them. She reads much faster than me, and I never read half the number of books when I was her age. But it's just lovely to see that passion already, and hopefully that'll stay with her, throughout her life. And I mean, for me, books are just one of just the best things. So anyway, thank you very much. I hope I haven't rambled on too much. And sure, if you want to get in touch with me, or hear about my books, or just have a bit of a chat, I'm on all the usual social media, and I've got a blog and a YouTube channel too. And I mean, I really like giving shout outs to the local scene, and reviewing local books in particular, so you'll be able to find some good recommendations there as well. Okay, everybody, so thanks again, and all the best.